Welcome back to another deep dive into R.C. Sproul's commentary on the Gospel of John.
Yes.
This time we're in chapter 4, and
Oh, it's a good one.
it really is.
Full of some profound theological insights, as always with Sproul.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And as we kind of journey with him through John chapter 4, we encounter these two very significant interactions of Jesus.
Yeah.
One with the Samaritan woman at Jacob's well, and then the other with a nobleman whose son is sick.
Yeah, and they're more than just stories, right? I mean, these encounters, they offer these really profound insights into Jesus's character and his mission and really the nature of faith itself.
Right. And Sproul, he jumps right in and he poses this question
Yeah.
that you might have thought about yourself if you've read this chapter.
Right.
And it's like, why did Jesus choose to travel through Samaria?
Yeah, because most Jews at that time, they would go to great lengths to avoid Samaria.
Right. Like it was a huge no-no.
Yeah, because there was all this historical baggage and religious tension between the Jews and the Samaritans. The Samaritans were considered heretics, outsiders,
Right.
And for Jesus to even be seen talking to a Samaritan woman, it would have been absolutely scandalous, like a blatant disregard for social and religious norms.
It's interesting, though, to think about the intentionality behind that.
Yeah.
What does Sproul say about that?
Well, he suggests that this wasn't just a random pit stop, for Jesus. He argues that Jesus deliberately chose this road because he knew this encounter was going to take place.
Wow.
It was a divine appointment orchestrated by God's providence.
That changes how you read it when you think about that.
Yeah.
Does he go on to say more about that?
He does. He kind of suggests that, if we take that interpretation seriously, it challenges us to see these events not merely as historical anecdotes,
Right.
but as moments that are pregnant with meaning and purpose.
Right.
And that even these seemingly chance encounters are part of God's grand design.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the encounter with the Samaritan woman. So what are some of the key insights that Sproul highlights there?
Well, the encounter begins with Jesus asking the woman for a drink of water.
Okay.
This really simple request, but Sproul says it's layered with meaning.
Right.
Not only is Jesus breaking cultural taboos by even speaking to her,
Right.
but he's also initiating a conversation that will eventually expose her deepest spiritual thirst.
Right. And then he throws in this concept of living water.
Yeah.
And she's like, wait a second, what are you talking about?
Yeah, she's thinking practical benefits. She doesn't understand the deeper implications.
She's like, how is this going to help me?
Right.
Literally.
She's thinking in earthly terms.
Yeah.
And so Sproul explains that Jesus uses this term living water to contrast the physical water from the well, which offers only temporary satisfaction, with the spiritual water that he offers,
Right.
which will ultimately quench a soul's longing for eternity.
And then the conversation takes a bit of a turn.
Yeah.
Right. And it gets a little bit more personal.
Yes, it does.
With Jesus gently confronting her about her past.
Yeah.
And we find out she's had 5 husbands.
5 husbands.
And is currently living with a man who isn't her husband.
Yeah, and Sproul really emphasizes here that Jesus isn't trying to shame her, but to expose the emptiness that she's been trying to fill with all the wrong things.
Right. It's almost like he's trying to expose her thirst.
Yeah, exactly. 5 husbands, and now living with another man. It speaks to this deep longing for love, acceptance, fulfillment.
Yeah. You feel the weight of her past.
Yeah.
And you think about how we so often try to quench our spiritual thirst
Yeah.
with things that can't truly satisfy us.
And Sproul highlights that he argues that, so often we see people searching not necessarily for God, but for peace or for relief from guilt.
Right.
For something to fill that void in their hearts. They're looking for a temporary fix, just like this woman, but nothing truly satisfies until they encounter the living Christ.
And this encounter at the well becomes a pivotal moment, not just for her life, but for her entire community.
It does.
And Sproul goes into that, right?
Yeah.
How this shift happens.
So as the conversation progresses, Jesus reveals his identity to her as the Messiah.
Wow.
And what's remarkable is her response. Instead of shrinking back in shame or disbelief, she runs back to her town and proclaims, "Come and see."
It's incredible.
She becomes a witness, sharing her newfound faith with those around her.
So it's like this encounter with Jesus, it has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
It impacts not just individuals, but entire communities.
It does. And as Sproul moves on to the story of the nobleman and his sick son, we see a very different side to faith. And we're confronted with new questions about what motivates people to seek Jesus.
That's interesting. Before we get there, let's just pause for a second.
Yeah.
And think about this for our listeners.
Yeah.
What are you truly thirsting for in your life?
Yeah.
Are you like the Samaritan woman, seeking fulfillment in things that ultimately leave you empty?
Yeah.
Or are you ready to encounter the living water that Jesus offers? Keep that question in mind as we continue our exploration of
Yes.
John chapter 4.
It's good stuff.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. So let's move on to this encounter with the nobleman.
Yeah.
One of the first things Sproul points out is this really stark contrast
Right.
between the nobleman's approach to Jesus and that of the Samaritan woman.
Yeah. What do you think he identifies as kind of the driving force behind each of them?
Well, the Samaritan woman, she came to the well simply to draw water
Right.
and engaged with Jesus out of genuine curiosity.
Right.
But the nobleman, on the other hand, he's driven purely by desperation.
Okay.
His son is on the brink of death, and he's heard that Jesus possesses this power to perform miracles.
So it's like he's not even really interested in Jesus, just what he can get from him.
Exactly. That's the point Sproul makes. The nobleman isn't initially interested in Jesus himself, only in what Jesus can do for him.
Right.
He's looking for this divine intervention.
Right. Like a divine vending machine almost.
It's like, give me what I want, and then I'll be on my way.
Yeah. Do you think he connects that to how we view faith today or how we approach faith today?
He suggests that this tendency to seek God primarily for what he can do for us
Right.
is something we often see even today. Sometimes our faith can be very conditional. It's like, okay, if God meets my needs, then I'll believe. Or if he grants me this tangible proof of his power, then I'll really get serious about following him. But, it's that struggle to trust in him when things are difficult or don't go our way.
Yeah, I see that a lot. And it's convicting, honestly.
Yeah.
So how does Jesus respond to the nobleman's plea for healing?
Well, instead of immediately, acquiescing to his demands,
Right.
Jesus challenges his faith.
Okay.
He says, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe.
He's kind of calling him out there.
He is, and Sproul uses this response to highlight the importance of genuine faith.
Okay.
A faith that isn't solely dependent on seeing miraculous signs.
Right.
He's trying to lead the nobleman to a deeper understanding of who he truly is beyond just being a miracle worker.
Okay, so how does the nobleman respond to that?
Well, he actually pleads even more desperately with Jesus,
Really?
begging him to come and heal his son before it's too late.
So he's persistent.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see that persistence even in the face of, Jesus's pointed words.
Right.
So
Does Jesus go with him?
Well, this is where the story takes a really intriguing turn.
Okay.
Instead of going with the nobleman, Jesus simply tells him, "Go, your son lives."
He just sends him on his way.
He does.
With a word.
Yeah, it's a very powerful moment.
Yeah.
And Sproul notes that the nobleman's reaction here is incredibly significant.
Okay.
Instead of demanding more, like prove it to me or insisting that Jesus physically come to his son,
Right.
the nobleman chooses to believe he simply trusts Jesus's word and leaves to return home.
What a display of faith.
It is.
To go from basically demanding this miracle
Yeah.
to just accepting Jesus's word
Yeah.
without any, physical proof.
Exactly. And it's here where Sproul's insight becomes really fascinating. He acknowledges that while the nobleman's initial motivation might have stemmed from desperation,
Yeah.
a genuine transformation takes place when he receives Jesus's word.
So what is it that happens then as he's on his way home?
Well, as the nobleman is making his way home,
Okay.
his servants meet him with incredible news. His son is alive and well.
Wow.
And they tell him that the fever broke at the exact moment Jesus spoke the words, "Go, your son lives."
Wow.
So you can imagine the impact that must have had.
Yeah. To have that confirmation,
Mhm.
to see that Jesus's words actually hold power.
It's a divine orchestration.
Yeah.
And Sproul suggests that this is the turning point for the nobleman.
Right.
What began as a desperate plea for help evolves into genuine belief.
Yeah.
Not just in Jesus' power to heal, but in Jesus himself as the Messiah, as the one who holds authority over life and death.
It's just amazing the different ways that people come to faith.
It is.
We see with the Samaritan woman, it was very much a conversation and a dialogue.
Yeah.
And here it's like he's almost demanding it of Jesus.
Yeah.
And then he just receives it and then later on gets that confirmation. But it's that confirmation, I think, that was really key.
Yeah. And so Sproul really dives into the complexity of faith.
Right.
There's no single formula,
Right.
He highlights that the nobleman's faith, initially driven by desperation and a desire for a miracle,
Right.
ultimately transforms into genuine belief in Jesus as the Messiah.
It makes you think, like, what would have happened if the miracle hadn't happened at that moment?
Yeah.
Would he have still come to faith? It's almost like that timing was really important.
Yeah. And it leads to another question, how often do we allow our faith to be contingent on seeing those tangible results?
Right.
Sproul seems to be pushing us toward this deeper, more unshakable faith,
Right.
one that isn't solely reliant on outward signs and wonders.
It's really challenging.
It is.
It's challenging us to examine our own motivations for seeking God
Mm-hmm.
and to consider, are we just coming to him for what he can do for us?
Yeah,
Or are we coming to him for who he is?
that's right. And that's the kind of introspection Sproul encourages. He wants us to wrestle with these questions and engage with the scriptures on a deeper level
Right.
and allow these encounters with Jesus to shape our understanding of faith.
Let's pause for a moment and think about that for our listeners.
Yeah.
What is the true nature of your faith?
Yeah.
Is it a desperate plea for help in times of need? Or is it a deep-rooted trust in Jesus regardless of your circumstances?
Yeah. Are you like the nobleman seeking a miracle, or are you seeking the miracle worker himself?
I think that's a good place to stop for today.
Yeah, that is good.
It's amazing to me how Sproul takes these seemingly simple stories
Yeah.
and then reveals all these layers of theological depth. Like he really encourages us to move beyond a surface reading of Scripture and really wrestle with the deeper implications.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he really makes you think.
Yeah, and so as we continue through John 4 with Sproul, we encounter this passage.
Yeah.
That often raises questions for readers,
Right.
where it seems like John maybe contradicts himself
Uh-huh.
about a prophet having no honor in his own country.
Yeah.
So it first says that Jesus went to Galilee because a prophet has no honor in his own country.
Right.
But then it goes on to say that the Galileans welcomed him.
Yeah, it seems like a contradiction.
It does.
Yeah.
So how does Sproul reconcile those two things?
Well, Sproul, being the astute theologian he is, doesn't shy away from these seeming inconsistencies.
Right.
He tackles them head on, and he invites us to think critically and engage with the text rather than just glossing over these difficult parts.
So what does he say about this one?
Well, he presents a few possibilities, and one interpretation he suggests is that John might be employing a bit of sarcasm
Okay.
when he says that the Galileans welcomed Jesus.
Okay.
He points out that their welcome might have been superficial based on the excitement surrounding his miracles rather than genuine recognition of who he truly was.
I see. So it's like they were drawn to his power, to what he could do for them,
Yeah,
but not necessarily to him as the Messiah.
right. And Sproul connects this to a tendency we often see even today. Okay.
Where people flock to those who promise quick fixes and easy answers, but aren't truly interested in the deeper, more challenging truths.
It's kind of like seeking a miracle, but not the miracle worker.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, what would have happened if Jesus had simply given into the pressure and performed signs and wonders whenever people demanded them?
Yeah. Would his mission have been different?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what Sproul is trying to convey about the nature of genuine faith.
Right.
True faith, he argues, isn't about manipulating God into giving us what we want.
Okay.
It's about trusting him even when we don't understand, even when things are difficult, even when we don't see immediate results.
So it's not really about the miracles themselves.
No.
It's about the transformation that happens in our hearts.
Yes.
When we encounter Jesus and surrender to his will,
Right.
even when it doesn't align with our own desires.
Precisely. Sproul reminds us that genuine transformation might not always be instantaneous or spectacular.
Right.
It's often gradual, sometimes even a messy process.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about aligning our hearts with God's will, seeking him for who he is rather than for what he can do for us.
This deep dive into John chapter 4, guided by Sproul's insightful commentary, has
Yeah.
been really illuminating, and it's challenged me personally to examine my own motivations for seeking God and to pursue a deeper, more authentic faith.
Me too. It's been really enriching. Sproul's ability to unpack those theological nuances and connect them to our lives is remarkable.
Yeah, and to our listeners, we encourage you to continue this journey with us.
Yes.
Pick up R.C. Sproul's commentary for yourself and delve into the richness of John chapter 4. Let his insights challenge you, provoke you, and lead you into a deeper understanding of who Jesus is.
And as you read, ask yourself this question that Sproul poses. If you were to ask Jesus for a drink of living water today, what would be the true thirst in your soul that you'd be seeking to quench?
Let that question guide your exploration and open your heart to the transformative power of encountering Jesus. Until next time, keep seeking that living water, for it is freely available to all who thirst.